So I'm going to do my first ever Q&A video, so please put your questions below. I've created a thread and I'd appreciate any questions that I will be releasing a video on. So thank you in advance for that. So the top 5 gym mistakes. I'm going to come at this from a slightly different angle and hopefully a slightly humorous angle as well. Number 1, too many isolation or accessory or small muscle movement exercises. Now don't get me wrong, these are important. These exercises, isolation, accessories, as part of a macro cycle, as part of your training blocks, these exercises should be incorporated. But the issue I see is that some people will have a whole workout session and a whole workout training block just using small movements, isolation exercises, these types of things. Now, if your entire session looks like this and you're not putting any large muscle movements in, now it doesn't have to be using a barbell, but compound movements which you're going to stress the nervous system, you're going to activate and recruit many muscle groups, agonist and antagonist muscle groups, which is highly effective, especially if you are a beginner. In my opinion, bro splits, arm days for beginners is not the most effective way to train. So that's point 1. Number 2, learning from Zoolander. Taking your fitness advice from the most beautiful man or woman just because they are popular. We know all about this on YouTube. And in addition, I'm going to throw in here the idea that you take information from specialty populations and apply that exactly to yourself. Now, a specialty population in fitness could be an elite bodybuilder, for example. So a mistake would be to take information from an elite bodybuilder and apply that completely to yourself, rather than taking their information, reading between the lines, taking what's useful and applying it to you as an individual. So you really must understand that the playing field is not level when it comes to you taking information from specialty populations. One example with elite bodybuilders is this super slow cardio. I see it all the time in the gym, young men doing super slow cardio because they've seen Mr. Olympia doing it. Of course, those guys have some really important information, but you have to take what applies to you. For example, Kai Green with his stretch and squeeze philosophy for repetitions and peak contractions, but don't copy what they do in terms of training and eating word for word. That may sound simple. It's actually a huge root of many problems. Number 3, training frequency. Now this heavily relates to your programming. We know that frequency of training is essential for creating adaptations. Now, whether that's muscle mass or strength or muscular endurance or flexibility or mobility, this would heavily relate to certain body splits. Point 1 that I mentioned with too many accessory isolation exercises, where maybe you're just doing that, you're hitting those muscle groups or those movements once every 7-8 days. If you're somebody who's struggling to make progress, consider perhaps using a different form of split with a higher frequency, hitting muscle groups several times within a week, for example. Number 4, which is my pet peeve, as I'm very meticulous in my planning in the gym, and it's not timing your rest periods. Now this relates to the wonderful piece of technology that is the smartphone, which is absolutely fantastic and can be very useful for fitness applications, but not in the gym when it comes to wasting time sitting in workout areas on your phone, checking your Facebook, and actually your timing between sets is absolutely vital to your intensity. If you are working through, for example, 8 to 12 reps for muscle growth, your intensity, the weight you choose, will relate to those 8 to 12 reps, but it will also relate to the time between your sets. How much fatigue are you keeping on your muscle by the time you hit your next working set? If you are resting too long and you're on your phone for 3 or 4 minutes and your goal is muscle growth, you're allowing your muscle to recover perhaps too much, and therefore you're decreasing the amount of fatigue and tension on the muscle groups, and therefore your weight and your intensity and your programming is all out of whack. It really depends on your programming as to how long you rest between sets, but most certainly, in my opinion, I'm a strong advocate in timing all of your rest sets between every set, throughout your whole workout, throughout every workout in your week. Get off your phone, stop doing this nonsense, and time your rest intervals. And last but not least, number 5, and this is no planned periodization. And also, if you are somebody who periodizes, boring periodization. So first of all, not periodizing at all, not having a macro cycle with training blocks in it. That would be linear periodization. I've made several videos about periodization, etc. if you want to know more about that. But essentially, when you're looking for progress and adaptation in the gym, you need to have a changing stimulus. Now, whether that's weights, reps, sets, movement patterns, there's an endless variety of possibilities. But you need to make sure that you have this progressive overload and change, and having this long-term planning, which is broken down into 1-week cycles, into 4-week cycles, into 6-week cycles, whatever it may be, is absolutely essential. Now, if you're somebody that periodizes, and most likely you are if you watch my channel, this applies to you too, because you can get stuck in the rut of a boring periodization program, which will actually perhaps lead to a lack of coherence with your program. And most likely, most people will use a linear periodization model, blocks of training, focusing on one goal at a time. And if you're somebody that does this, consider changing how you categorize your exercises. If you're using linear periodization, let's say, for example, 4-week blocks of training before you change each block, perhaps you're focusing on muscle groups, which is fine. But maybe for your next block, you can look at movements. You can look at perhaps having a push and pull day, or focusing on movements. Or you could focus on categorizing according to mass and acceleration. You can categorize your training in terms of how heavy your lifts are, or the speed you're using in your lifts. Supramaximal, maximal lifts down to strength speed, all the way down to ballistic movements. I've made a video about that too. And so that's another way of categorizing. Or what I would really find interesting for you to look into is a conjugate periodization model. I'm going to make a specific video about conjugate periodization because it's incredibly interesting and important. And Louis Simmons has popularized it in the West, essentially taking Eastern Bloc training methods and applying them to his Westside Barbell Gym. And conjugate training is essentially where you have many different training goals which you work on simultaneously. Look for alternative ways to program your training, because as I say in most of my videos now, change equals adaptation. When you are optimizing, as useful as optimizing can be, as useful as having a training goal and programming your training to meet that goal, of course that's important. But when you're optimizing, you're not adapting. So what other gym mistakes have you seen out there? Please comment below. So I'd be interested to hear your input as to the biggest gym mistakes you see as part of your fitness journey. And so this is Shredded Sports Science. I'll see you soon.